Hello, everyone. My name is Alessandro Ruggio. I'm the director of the Istituto Italiano di Cultura. I'm very happy to have you here today for this webinar. This is the third installment of a series of 4 conversations that the Istituto decided to organize. And the decision to organize the 4 conversations came to in April, May is when we started to work on this. So in the midst of the worst period of the pandemic, and the idea was to find 4 keywords somehow to address the changes that have been forced by this dramatic disruption that has been caused by the pandemic. So I decided to invite 2 curators, Francesca Molteni from Italy, from Milan, and Sasha Hastings here from Toronto, to join the Istituto and to help us to find out the right keywords, to define the themes, and to invite the speakers. So we came up with 4 different words, and this is the third. The first was we had last week, we had the body. We started with void, and today is breath. Next week, we're going to have the last one, and it will be care. So as you can see, there is a sort of progression. I mean, we are exploring different topics and different aspects in a sort of philosophical, possibly abstract way. Not too abstract, though. Today, we have 2 outstanding speakers, and I'm sure the discussion, the conversation will be extremely intriguing. They come from 2 different fields of interest and operation. Philip Beesley is an acclaimed Canadian architect, design, and multidisciplinary artist. And Paolo Inglese is the botanicist and the director of the Botanical Garden in Palermo, an incredible place. You should all go to Palermo as soon as possible and see the Botanical Garden, because it's an experience that you can't miss, if I can say that. Anyway, I won't take too long, but I would like to introduce briefly Francesca Molteni. With Francesca, we have been collaborating in the past on several projects, mostly on architecture and design, mostly on design, I would say. Francesca graduated in philosophy in Milan and then studied film production at New York University. Since 2002, she produces and directs films and documentaries and curates design exhibitions. In 2009, she founded Muse Factory of Projects, a production company based in Milan. Latest film includes Super Design, Italian radical design, that we have the opportunity to present in Toronto as well, and The Power of the Archive, Renzo Piano Building Workshop. And she is the author of the book Oggetti d'Impresa, Objects of Enterprise, published by Carocci in Italy in 2016. So I now invite Francesca Molteni to introduce the 2 speakers. I just would like to remind you that you can join the conversation. You're really warmly invited to join the conversation, and you can use the Q&A tool that you can find at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to send us your questions and to be part of the conversation. Francesca, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you so much. And thank you to our guest. Thank you to Sasha, who is sharing with me this beautiful and very intense experience of having conversations between Italy and Canada in this difficult time. So today we are, let's say, into this difficult and very specific word, breath. Just breathe. How many times did we hear this sentence? Breathing is the first act of life, the élan vital, the vital impetus. It's starting point of everything, but it's also the end of life in a way. Take your last breath. During the period, the pandemic, and the period that we are all in, we experimented that breathing is not obvious at all. The coronavirus that causes COVID-19 attacks the lungs and the respiratory system, sometimes resulting in significant damage. Working toward recovery starts simple, with a focus on breathing, says John Hopkins, a physical therapist fighting Lyme. She offers a series of breathing exercises to aid in recovery for those who had COVID-19 or other serious illness. Inhale and exhale. Breathing is an action made of two different, let's say, parts. It's like the sea on the beach. The world inside is taken out, and what is outside of me is, let's say, part of me. You can forbid someone to do everything except for breathing. And today we are in this particular condition of course, wearing a mask on our mouth. And our voice is changing, is quieter, less powerful. Wearing a mask reduces our power as human beings, but it's the only way to be responsible for ourselves and for the others. So there is a connection between breathing and speaking, between physiology and politics in a way. Breathing is an act of being citizens and being, in a way, political human being. I write poetry because the English word inspiration comes from the Latin spiritus, breath, and I want to breathe freely. This is a sentence from a famous poem by Allen Ginsberg, Improvisation in Beijing in 1984. Breathe is related to inspiration and to oxygen, to art and science, to different fields of our, let's say, human expression that are not easily connected in today and especially in the artistic field. That's why, I mean, we are very, very happy in a way to have two different approaches today. From the Greek psyché, the breath is the spirit, and we have a Philip Beesley, let's say, that is connected also to the technology and science part of what is more into Paolo Inglese's field, the plants, the forests, the botanical garden that he's very, very proudly directing. So we discovered that our breath and the breath of the earth are connected more and more. Inspiration is coming today from these two amazing speakers, Philip Beesley, as Alessandro already introduced him a little bit. He's, of course, an artist, an architect, a designer, and a researcher. I would like to announce his researches into interactive architecture. He's also the leader of leading the scaffold discipline stream within the Living Architecture Systems Group. He will tell us more about it, an international network of scientists, engineers, artists, which brings together researchers and industry partners in a multidisciplinary research cluster dedicated to developing built environments with qualities that come close to life. Paolo Inglese is a professor of general arboriculture and arbor cultivation at the University of Palermo. He's Sicilian, lover of mountains, and studied in Palermo and Florence. And he has different titles in the Italian and International Academy, but he studies things that are not so common as regulatory mechanism, the quality of the fruit, and a passionate scholar of the cactus pear. So it's very interesting to have these two different approaches. The international scope of Paolo's studies and research had brought him to know extraordinary places and people all over the world, but also in the more active centers of applied research. So I'm very happy to introduce Philip Beesley first, and then Paolo to follow before the discussion and the Q&A. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. I am so happy and humbled to join you today. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, and perhaps I can raise some fundamental questions because I love breathing. I want to breathe. I want to share breathing. I want to share my breath. And I am haunted by the voices that have happened this year. Some individual voices that say, I can't breathe. And other voices that say, it's not safe to breathe. I hope that what I share might be a contribution to these questions. Let me just share a few screens, a few slides that ask some very fundamental questions about how we can live together, the hope of this work. And it's underlined by a sense of my own childhood. I wonder if your own childhood is similar to mine when I was brought up by very, very special, beautiful parents who wanted to teach me that instead of religion being over me, and instead of beliefs being over me, and instead of power being established, that it was very helpful to empty out space itself and to understand that there was extraordinary silence between everything, that God was in some beautiful way dead. This kind of philosophy that ran through the 20th century and that was very, very important to me was a kind of pride that we could believe and understand that between the planets and between the molecules there is simply emptiness, void. And for a time that seemed such an enabling quality to me, enabling me to act freely, enabling me to not be bound by the previous sentiments and beliefs of aristocracy and religion and tradition, but instead simply to look at each other in empty space and to be free. And yet, when I look at an image of space today, I see a fundamentally different quality than that emptiness. The beautiful information that has been gathered by the Hubble Space Telescope and by CERN deep underground, the complete collection of all known radio transmissions in the world, produce this kind of image. The large Bolshoi simulation, Bolshoi meaning grand, and in all of those tiny little bits of distant data and clusters, what a remarkably different kind of space is spoken of. Rather than empty space, surely we see deep, nested, filamentary networks emerging across space and time in an absolutely tangible and real way, informing new research of submolecular relationships and of the outer space itself. And I think this allows me to see, instead of empty space, a much older word for what connects us all. Rather than space, I think we can say ether. In fact, Einstein used that word to describe the space. It raises a fundamental question about what kind of language we use to connect ourselves, and in turn, what kind of space itself we could make. I'm an architect, I'm a sculptor, I make places. What gathers us? The kind of existentialist generation that I came from perhaps took some pride in clearing the way and making a stripped, hardened, empty forum, relying on the sense of the world being solid and of things being solid that I could simply strip away and concentrate on making things free. And yet today, in this sense of the trembling sense of the earth, the fundament which is not solid and which does not support me or my beloved or my family or my friends or my community or our worlds, what possible response can we give? Rather than the kind of pride in creating emptiness and freedom, I want to convey a kind of hope in which quite deliberate, unapologetically fragile dimensions and skins and worlds and halos and fundaments and meniscuses too can spin around ourselves so that we might feel connected. And I hope that that can turn into a very optimistic kind of architecture which deeply interweaves through us, producing a kind of delicious imbrication, a complete continuity between things, a saturation, perhaps even a soil, and a deep liquid kind of air. Let me offer some of the projects that have tried to act on this kind of sensibility of deep interconnection in which space is full and fertile. 10 years ago, I and my colleagues made hylozoic ground in Venezia, trying to make a layered symphony of connection. More recently in Seoul, we made many layers, gardens full of interconnected behaviors and layers of chemical behavior, trying to create new organic electricity. And underlying this is a sense of precarity, making something very, very deliberately fragile, so that instead of making something strong and reliable, I try to make something weak so that it cannot possibly tell where it will turn next, in a kind of a joyous precarity, a sense that we can contribute reaction to the world, and that reaction and openness and sensitivity can be a profound contribution, not simply a sickness and vulnerability. This is supported by work in computational modeling too. The name for the kind of interaction that we see here is quasi-geostrophic turbulence. I love those syllables, meaning the turning of the earth in a very special way, not in the turning of a hurricane or the fearsome force of a tsunami, but rather in the sense of an idyll, in which very nearly balanced forces shift just this way and just that way, and just back again and forth again, making a kind of deep interwoven fertility. This then is constructed very deliberately through computational modeling of deeply interwoven meshworks, and it's constructed again into spheres and nests and sanctuaries, and then built as scaffolds, using the kind of cores of multiple individual cells and weaving them together, and producing very, very lively behavior in which software drives fields of interaction throughout environments, rippling back and forth in great chaotic and turbulent waves. Special software is developed in order to support this kind of work that allows things to be visualized, and then the computational space itself is set up in a kind of space perhaps equivalent to a political accord, where after great tribes have been warring, a kind of a peacetime emerges in which very free, gentle bifurcations can be exchanged back and forth in a great fertile interwoven network which is constantly precarious. This produces very special software of many individual elements all interwoven together so that there's a great agency between parts. And it produces an industrial design as well, which produces colonizations and fields which constantly infect and invade and regenerate each other. In the end, I hope that this kind of work might produce a renewed relationship between people and the soil and the air, in which space is not empty and not void, but rather somehow we feel that we are profoundly connected and interconnected, rather than a fear needing to close myself off from the virus, from the other, from insecurity. A kind of fertility can be very deliberately built, I believe, and I hope that the kind of crafts that I'm showing and sharing in my own work can demonstrate that resilience and durability and tenacity is absolutely possible, allowing this word imbrication, or a sense of being deeply, deeply interconnected, to being a kind of delicious, fertile experience. And so my hope is that some terms can be contributed in the question of how we can live together and how we can gather together, rather than a preceding body of belief that needed the solidity of the earth. Firmitas, this Roman paradigm that made architecture need to have a firmity and a permanence and a durability. I hope that a kind of joyful precarity, constantly refreshing itself, might allow us to use a new version of space, which is of course a very, very old name as well, ether. I hope then that that might be a contribution in which the soil and the air and my body and my relationships are all together breath. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip. We will talk later. I'm sure we have a lot to discuss. So, Paolo, please, you are invited to join us. Thanks.
Well, let me share the screen first. Is it okay? Well, good evening, everybody. I hope that Rita Levi-Montalcini and Albert Einstein were right when they say that there is no large differences between an artist and a scientist, because Philip was so incredibly good and inspiring that I have no idea if I can do something similar to what he did. Anyway, we will try. Pneuma, rua, spiritus, and breathe. The term of spiritus in Latin means breathing, but it means only also the Spirit of God, as you see in the picture of the mosaic of the Arboreal Cathedral. You see the creation of man, of human beings, through the breathing of God. And we have a kind of first question. Why the Genesis is located in a Garden of Eden, plenty of plants and trees? Maybe this is just to remind us that plants and trees are the beginning of our existence in Earth. Maybe the mythology or the religion is just telling us the truth, because, oh, it doesn't move. Oh, yes, sorry. Because as you can see, this is very simple. It may look difficult, but it is very simple. For billions of years, there were no oxygen in Earth. Nothing, no one, but only just a few. But as a very small living organism, a bacteria, started to become autotroph, to discover the miracle of life, which is, you will see, the photosynthesis. Plants came afterwards, and then seaweeds. And the difference between these living organisms and any other living organism in Earth is that they respire producing oxygen. When we respire, the animals or everything else in the world, we respire, we income the oxygen, but we outcome CO2. The only living organisms that make us able to live in Earth are the photoautotrophs. And oxygen, which is life for us, was the source of the first great extinction, known as the oxygen catastrophe, or the glaciation, the Uranian glaciation, 3 billion years before Jesus Christ. So oxygen may be life and may be dead. It depends on the organism you are. And this is the miracle of life, the photosynthesis. The photosynthesis, I always tell to my student that you have to look carefully, not even to a tree, but to a single leaf. Because what occurs in a single leaf is what God is presumed to, that God did when he breathed on man, transforming the mineral world, the CO2 and water, in sugars and proteins. If you give us CO2 and water, the only thing we can do is Coca-Cola, Coke. From carbon dioxide and water, we produce Coke. But plants, seaweeds, euglena, and cyanobacteria, they produce life. They produce sugars. They produce energy. And this is the basic equation in our planet. The difference between our planet and any other planet is the photosynthesis, because they are the only living organisms able to produce it, CO2. You see, only few species, 400,000 species of plants, 20,000 species of seaweeds, 45 species of euglena, and 7,000 to 8,000 cyanobacteria, through the stomata and the mitochondria, through organisms, very small organisms, they produce life. Life on Earth depends on these organisms. They can stand after us, but we cannot stand without them. We breathe because they breathe. And everything, every living organism respire in Earth today after the presence of oxygen in the air, 20% of oxygen in the air. All the system is a balance between gas, is a balance which is invisible to us, but which is very basic. This balance between CO2, O2, carbon dioxide, humus in the soil, temperatures, is the cycle of life. The carbon cycle and the O2 and the oxygen cycle is the real circle of life. Natural and urban forest respire. I don't go in numbers, you can just read the numbers. But what they do is to add oxygen and to sequestrate carbon dioxide. What human beings are making today is just the opposite. During the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, we have the fire in Australia, the big fire. It was just the way to say us, this is the ultimate breathing of a forest. A fire is a very, in terms of energy, is a big breathing, a very strong breathing, and is the last one that nature can make before dying. Fire. We produce fires and CO2, and they produce oxygen to us. %50 of the oxygen is produced in the mainland by plants, and 50% is produced in the oceans by seaweeds. Seaweeds and cyanobacteria and invisible organisms not only feed mammals, but also feed every living organism in Earth. what the pandemic is telling to us is take care of our earth, take care of our organism producing oxygen for us. Otherwise, there is no life for us. Because the life we know and the environment we know depend on those organisms. But remember always, the life on Earth will exist even without oxygen. The prokaryote, the yeast, and some bacteria, they live without organisms. They make glycolysis. They can live without. So there is life without us. There is life without oxygen, but there is not our life without oxygen. So what the plants basically say us is, let us breathe if you want to breathe any longer. If you don't make ourselves breathing, we will not breathe in the future. But we have some funny ideas like forest bathing. Forest bathing is just walking in the forest. And you see in the web so many people advertising forest to bath in. It's a good idea. And I love Henry David Thoreau when he said, when we walk, we naturally go to the field and wood. What would become of us if we walked only in a garden or in a mall? That is basically what we do in cities without having any idea of the resource we have with the oxygen we respire. Oxygen can damage ourselves if it's too much, and can damage ourselves if we lack of oxygen. And the balance is very tight. If we go too much above 20%, it can be a problem. If we can go down to 18 or 17%, it can be a problem. So the pandemic is telling us, take care of the environment if you want to take care of us. And start looking at plants, not as ornamental things, living things in the world, but the basic organism from which life depends on Earth, from which our life depends on. Thank you. I think you have 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Thank you, Philip. Paolo, please stay with us with your mic and your video. Thank you. So now I think we have a lot to discuss. Of course, thank you so much for both the presentations, because they are so, I think, inspiring. And today it's a word that we can use a lot. We can breathe, but we need also inspiration to feed ourselves.
Inspiration is part of breathing, inspiring.
Exactly. So I want to start with a question for Philip, and then we will have, I'm sure, more to share. Philip, from your both, let's say, both your presentations, they look complementary also because on your side, we can see the power of the human being that can think about a universe, and that is a lot to think about, an empty space, a space without God, let's say, and design a different way of being, maybe better, maybe a space, a universe where we are all connected in a different way. In Paolo's presentation, what we can, let's say, feel is the fragility and the strong connection that we have to the botanical, let's say, field, to the plants, to even the smallest bacteria that we don't even think about, that can exist and be part of our, let's say, body and connection to the world. So, Philip, in these two, let's say, fields, what do you think that we can learn from the inorganic life in a way? And what the organic should in a way be improved by the inorganic? Or putting the question in a different way, we are being a lot digital and we're living and experience a third space that is the digital one. How can we as human beings connect to each other through what is immaterial, invisible?
Francesca, you are asking such a beautifully difficult question, and when I look at Paolo's extraordinary presentation that emphasizes just how very fragile and vulnerable and important the world is, combined with perhaps some of the hopeful work that I've shown, I think of a fundamental kind of tearing. Shakespeare said, "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, and yet what to me is this quintessence of dust." This sense of a fundamental split between the need for power and control and clarity and boundary making, the tradition of the West, let's say, of taking command and clarifying, stripping away so that we can organize. And yet the extraordinary polarization that perhaps the second law of thermodynamics gives us, in the sense that entropy is inexorable, that we move into coldness, that we turn to dust. This is what one vision of the world gives us. These two tearing qualities make me wonder whether there are lessons of something which exists very much in between those things, rather than being so preoccupied with making walls, or on the other hand, fearing falling apart and fundamentally having to fight the laws of nature and physics. What it makes me wonder is whether it is possible to somehow come to believe in the lovely sense of openness and fragility that can come when something is immersing itself through me. I breathe and I am swimming in a continual vapor. Is it possible somehow to introject, to believe that letting things into my body rather than resisting and making boundaries is actually making life, that it's a source of fertility? How can I possibly have confidence in this in today, when I am fearing breathing, when I feel like I need to seal myself away, when I need to control and govern the world? I think that our language is very, very limited for sheer involvement. There's such the images that Paolo started with, I feel, gave us the idea that the garden is somehow also dirty. The soil is there, it's dirt, it's clay, it's something to rise out of into the light, not to be in the dark soil and the dirty earth. This, I have to say, this is how I'm trained to think, that light is better than dark is equated with the earth and soil, and I wonder whether it is possible somehow to find an intermediate state, and I feel this needs a new language, to actually believe in ambivalence and the amphibian state of moving in between these extraordinary polarities. Now that's a long answer, but I hope that some of the craft work that is shown here suggests that it is possible to use deeply interconnected systems, which are very deliberately precarious, rather than ones which are focused on just being a tool and just surviving. So I have to really answer with the riddle and with the question. I hope it's okay to answer with a question like that.
Of course. And it's from your, let's say, answer that I would like to go back to Paolo. The interconnection of the system. Paolo, as you mentioned a little bit in your presentation, a forest is a strange community, but it's very interconnected. And we have, again, maybe a lot to learn from this community in terms of being together in a democracy and not being together in a, let's say, prison or in a gate, closed by a gate.
But yes, but I think the most important lesson we have from the pandemic and the virus for a simple, small living organism is that the world is interconnected. They don't care about borders. They don't care about sovereignty. They don't care about politics. Just go. They just go everywhere because there are no borders in nature. Borders as a cultural concept of human beings, not for nature. The stability of the law I show you depends on the fragility of billions of our living organisms, on single lives. So the big laws depends on small problems. And small problem can create very big problems. The interconnection in a forest or in any plant community is clear. When you leave even your balcony alone for a week or 2 weeks or 1 month, you will discover a big amount of new species. You can imagine you can run, you can rule your balcony. But if you go out, the balcony can rule itself. Even finding new resources or looking for new plants to go. This afternoon, I have a strange experience in my mother's house, which was left 4 years ago. I went in the terrace. The terrace was left with nobody for 4 years and with some plants. I didn't find my old plants, but I found 50 new plants I'd never seen in my life in 60 years in that place. It means that the nature can recover itself, not following my rules, but following the rules of the system. And the system, it's something we still don't understand as a system. We know single part. The mosaic of Monreale is a mosaic. We know single parts of the mosaic, but the general picture is largely unknown. And depends on a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach rather than, a very close approach. Just go to see an aspect and know all the other aspects. In this term, science and art are very similar. I appreciate very much what Philip did. The vision. I think science must have vision today to save us because we are in danger. We are really in danger. Scientists tell us every year in the last 10, 20 years, we are in danger. The Rome Protocol in the early 70s says, we are in danger. We are exploiting too much our resources. No one listens. Now is the time to listen. And a small virus is telling us, please listen. This is the lesson we have to listen.
I wonder whether I can ask you a question, Paolo, that comes rather closely out of that. My question is, how can we see how a small action might make a difference? Because things are so very confusing on this front for me, and I'm sure for all of us. On one hand, if I throw a pebble in a pond or cast something into a garden, it seems like it is swallowed up and deeply buffered and very quickly kind of integrated into the whole surrounding. And yet at the same time, I know from the great physicist and chemist Ilya Prigogine speaking 60 years ago that the beat of a butterfly can actually create a tsunami and can create the most catastrophic conditions. And so this gives me two fundamentally different
Practice approach. Yeah.
On one, should I walk on eggs because I cannot tell how damaging I can be, or should I actually trust in being swallowed up together? This is a tremendously polarized, precarious picture. Do you have an insight in that could offer action that gives confidence?
I mean, nature has a great feedback capacity. You ask me a simple act that make changes. Do you like gardening, Philip?
I love gardening.
Okay, if you go gardening, even in your terrace, in a balcony, you just remove weeds, or you just plow the soil a little bit, or you remove the soil and mix the soil. If you measure the quantity, I mean, people believe that soil is only a system in which the plant develop. The soil is a living and respiring organism. It's not a physical fact. It's a biological fact. It's an organism. It's a kind of organism. And if you remove soil and weed, you change millions of bacteria. You use the organic, or you change the organic matter in the soil. And these make great changes, because if you reduce the organic matter, then the rain will destroy the soil, and you have runoff, and you have erosion. So the simple act of plowing the soil, which is one of the most important acts of human beings in the past and still today, changing completely Earth. And it's a very, and if you don't, the solution is always things in holistic terms. Only believe that your action, this is true in politics, this is true in social life, this is true in civil life. Your simple action are related to the healthiness of everybody and the healthiness of the system. So the simple action on not using plastic bottle, not putting your cigarettes in the ground, are very simple action, but if you add one action with other action, you have the island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean. So a simple act, throwing a bottle, become an island of plastic in the ocean, because it is a quantitative phenomenon. Okay, I hope I made myself clear enough.
It's beautiful.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you. We have a different questions from the audience, and then I will go back with mine. But I want to start with Philip. How Philip can integrate theoretically oxygen concept into his sculptures or living architecture, let's say.
Maybe I can offer a technical and a theoretical answer. The expanded scaffolds that we have been making include glass manifolds of many chambers with individual chemical interactions in them. And rather than one large kind of mechanical system to, say, stir the air so that this can be an alternative way of making a great centralized being, we've been very impressed by the idea, something similar to the way a termite mound is organized in many cells that are gently interconnected, in which the pressure differentials in every single cell can oscillate back and forth, and the chain reactions between those in many cells can become very strong. And sometimes it can be coordinated, but at the same time it can also have a kind of ambivalence where things rise and fall in different fields. so that ultimately the whole thing is just about standing the same, even though it is continually refreshing itself. So those little cells right now, they might be an algae biogenerator, and we make a couple of hundreds of those and interconnect them, produce a kind of a sketch, a model of how a synthetic soil might work. So in technical terms, this kind of very, very distributed topology seems to make very substantial and really very happy kind of organizations. But I think even more fundamentally conceptually, by trying to make the individual mechanisms and scaffolds within this physical construction not strong, but weak, a festival of bringing material in and riddling itself with gentle vapors and gentle tremulousness in the air, a sensibility of being bathed in a space so that we are the oxygen and the nitrogen and the carbon dioxide. Our body is experienced in this kind of gentle fragility is perhaps a conceptual pursuit. And this is founded in a different design practice. Rather than making something concentrated and bounded, it seems very beneficial to try to make something follow more akin to the way a snowflake works rather than a clear drop of water. The sense of maximum reaction phase and maximum fragility and maximum reactivity seems like a very promising principle to follow. So I hope the theoretical and the practical examples might be an answer. It's an interesting question.
Thank you, Philip. It is actually, and I think it's also bringing us to the next one from the audience that is for the two of you, but we can start with Paolo. It's a question about transformation. Breathing is not just having air in and out, but transforming what we are in a way. But many people are, let's say, resistant to change, especially today. For example, people are, let's say, they have inflexible political positions and they don't think they can change their mind. How we can build bridges of exchange, not in a physical way, but more in a political way?
Wow. I mean, first of all, we have to understand what breathing is. Breathing is the way we produce energy. Through respiration, we destroy carbohydrates and we produce energy, we move. So the better we respire, the more energy we have. Making bridges among people and among nations is the ultimate choice we have. I don't believe in anybody asking for sovereignty of single nations today, because we human beings developed such a network all over the world that we cannot go back. I mean, if you in 2nd century go from engines to airplanes and internet, then you cannot say, okay, we can fly, we have internet, but we have to stay in the same nation with borders closed and blah, 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 because it's stupid. It's simply stupid. If you, with these tools, build up an economic world, because connection make economy greater, then you cannot go back and say, okay, I want to grow economy, but I want to stay alone, because it's controversial, it's a nonsense. I don't know how to, what I believe strongly is that we miss at world level a new political philosophy. I mean, yesterday I talked with a colleague of mine, he is a philosopher, and I said, why we still start our course in political with David Ricardo and Smith? with the homos economicus of the 19th centuries. Where is the new theory of politics today? I mean, in Italy, the condition, I don't know in Italy, I would mention United States or even Brazil, the condition is crazy. In any part you find a deep thinking in politics, only fighting between them, only, I even don't know, the Twitter and stuff like that, just few phrases. But my generation, I'm 60, we were educated to read books, to read philosophy, to read theories of politics. And I wonder what is reading my son today. My son actually studying politics, so I know what he read. But our son, what are they reading about politics today? Which is the new policy? It's not a Latouche or something like this, but the new real politics, the basic philosophy in politics after Engels, Marx, Ricardo, Smith. What happened in the last 40 years? Jacques Maritain, I know some of them, but where is the philosophy of politics today? I'm just an agronomist. I have no answer for that.
Maybe your son will give us some tentatively answers.
I mean, if I see politicians today, I see they didn't study. They just know the game. The game. If you know the game of politics, it's just a game. But if you know what politics is for, you need to study. Too many politicians have no bachelor. I'm not talking about PhDs. No bachelor. Nothing. And they say, oh man, I've been training in the street. No, I like you studied.
Paolo, I'm not sure that in Canada is going that bad, let's say. Philip.
In Italy, it's going that bad.
The question, though, is that we are sharing together today is fundamentally political, as well as existential and natural. And I feel very willing as an architect and sculptor to speak about how we live together. The question of the res publica is the fundament of politics, and it surely can be a profound, continually refreshed question, rather than the stupidity of little teenage boys and girls in tribes trying to win just based on their little family and, surrounded by a wall that closes things out. Instead, I think that the kind of word nation needs to be profoundly refreshed today into the sense of the deep, joyfully cooperative mongrel of so many parts woven together. I think that sensibility can result, rather than fearing difference, being absolutely curious and fascinated and seeing just how much exchange and cooperation and how much benefit can come from having deeply, deeply open boundaries. Now, this is such a test to the spirit when we see that we can become ill and we can die because of the infections of each other. And so this is a very, very sensitive time to build up experience and resilience and the capacity for our metabolisms to be able to handle a new virus and turn it into something like a cold virus, which is annoying and difficult, but somehow we roll with it and somehow we can make it into a new ecology. And this takes great, great care, but it cannot be served by the kind of spasms of simply sealing things off. This will only concentrate and only worsen the condition. So to me, it's a profoundly important political mission to work and cooperate in order to find new balances.
Thank you, Philip. We have, I think, at least one more question. I know that it's getting a little bit late, but I think there are two very interesting questions, but I will start with the first one. will a political philosophy of fragility and weakness save us and save the earth? It's a provocative question, I'm sure, but I'm sure also that it's very important to reply. So to Paolo first.
I was looking to Philip's work, and I was trying to understand which is the link between me and Philip. And I have one word: complexity. He has a very complex, apparently very complex work, but very clear. Complexity in nature is important. Complexity means stability, while simplicity means, for instance, in policy, dictatorship. And the more complex is an organism, the more stable it is, while the more simple is an organism, the most unstable it is. This is the difference, for instance, between intensive and traditional agricultural systems. In nature, weakness and fragility are not important words. If you think, for instance, that bacteria have no walls, or many bacteria has only one cell, but a system of virus, if the coronavirus was only one living virus, no problem. But the problem is there are billions and billions and billions. So weakness is it's a difficult concept if you approach it to the system. The system may become very weak if you reduce its complexity. If you try to remove what we perceive as something which disturbs the system, meaningless. In many cases, we eliminate something because we believe it's not needed, like weeds. When I was a student in agronomy, we had a course, I tried to translate the name of the course from Italian English, War to Weeds. In the 70s, it became control to weeds in 10 years. Now is using of natural weed. So we, in 40 years, we went from fighting the weeds, controlling the weeds, living with the weeds, using the weeds, let them live together. It's a science. So the danger, and still the farmers, even Philip in his garden, the first time in Sunday morning or Saturday afternoon, he removed weeds because he feel my roses are in danger because of the weeds. Take care of your weeds, Philip. If you remove all your weeds, your roses can become weaker.
Philip, to you too, the last, I'm afraid it's the last answer.
Fragility and weakness are traditional terms that I have been taught to hate, and perhaps the mental equivalent is ambivalence, when I cannot tell what to do. And these things are certainly not manly, and they may even be irresponsible in the way we are taught. And yet we know that in a moment of inspiration, when we bring in something, we have to be open. We also know that when we get ideas, we have to be very, very delicate and completely vulnerable in order to allow this absurd transformation to somehow bring ourselves into a new reality. So it is precisely, I think, the practice of knowing how to be fragile and unapologetically weak that is an absolutely essential part of any growing, living, transforming, regenerating system. Now, this makes a riddle. How can we practice weakness in a time which is a wartime where we have to seal ourselves away and be as strong as possible. But I believe that it is possible to use some different language and to see that it is not simply an all or nothing question at all, but rather, when you roll down a hill, it's a delicious sense of making yourself dizzy. When we are sometimes confused, but somehow somebody doesn't mock me for being confused, but actually says, hey, that's kind of funny. Could we see the irony in this? Can we grow into a new situation? Then those kind of practices can be tremendously enabling. And the practice of design for decay, as well as strength, allows the kind of cycling and the multiple kind of interconnections that I believe will help to fulfill things. So we need a new language, I believe, which can fold in these kind of qualities. So my simple answer to the question is yes, I do believe that those questions can help save the world.
Me too.
Thank you so much. I think that we all agree that we need, in a way, a new language, and we hope that this strange and incredible moment that we are all sharing on the earth will help us at least to come out with different words and a different, let's say, orthography or topography, as Philip has very brilliantly explained in his presentation. I'm very happy that we also created this new, let's say, connection between Paolo and Philip, between a very special place in Palermo and another special one in the digital space and in the physical space. When Philip will come to Venice, we are all really fighting for that, for the next Biennale of Architecture in Venice 2021. We had to cancel all the important cultural events, and not just those this year, but we hope that the next one will be the time for a new encounter also of people with more efforts, more, let's say, fragilities, but stronger, let's say, will to fight what is not, let's say, correct today. So the next conversation, I'm very happy that you, in a way, prepare also our next talk next week will be about care. And what we talk about this evening or day for you was care as well, taking care of what is invisible and taking care of what is there, but we don't look at it as vibrant as we are as human beings. So thank you so much. I'm not, maybe Alessandro would like to say goodbye, and really thank you for the great presentation tonight.
Here I am. Thank you so much. Really, I'm really enthusiastic about the presentation. That's been beautiful. Yeah. So thank you very much, Paolo. I really look forward to be in Palermo with you and visit the Botanical Garden. Thank you very much, Philip, for the incredible, terrific contribution. And thank you very much, Francesca. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and you led beautifully the conversation. It's really great for the Institute to have opportunity like this to collaborate with great thinkers like you, like Paolo, and like Philip. It's a great enrichment for us, for me personally, and for I hope all our followers. And it's one of the pleasure to work in an institute is the opportunity really to connect with people like you and to have the opportunity to share this with our audience. So again, thank you very much. And I really look forward to the next webinar in a week from now with Sasha Hastings as a moderator, and with Simone Sfriso, architect from Venezia, and with Gaetan Werner from Toronto, director of the Power Plant Contemporary Gallery. So thank you again. Take care, everyone, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.